Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm proud to stand along two remarkable leaders here today. Candace Lang, Chief Executive Officer and President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, representing businesses large and small right across this country. And Carol Saab, the Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the voice of our local governments and the front line of our communities. Together, the three of us represent literally millions of Canadians, workers, employers, and communities, united in a clear message. President Trump's tariff hike is reckless, and it will cause economic damage on both sides of the border. We stand with Canadian workers, with businesses, with local economies to keep this country going. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, Donald Trump's unjustifiable and reckless tariffs are an attack on Canada. Since November, Donald Trump has been threatening thousands of jobs and entire industries right here in our country. And now, with his decision to double tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to a staggering 50%, that increase taking effect today, Donald Trump has made it clear that he isn't backing down. And I can tell you neither are we. Canada will not back down. This decision by the U.S. administration risks cutting us off from our largest trading partner and threatens to devastate the Canadian steel and aluminum sectors. On top of this, Donald Trump's trade war jeopardizes good union jobs in auto, in aerospace, in agri-food, in construction, and in defense. Not to mention the indirect jobs that will be impacted by this reckless trade war. We don't need to look at the numbers on a spreadsheet to know the damage. Just look and talk to the workers on the ground. And I have. Over the last few months, I've been to dozens of communities across our country. I've met with workers who keep our economy running and our communities strong. Workers who power entire towns and entire regions. From Hawkesbury, Ontario to Selkirk, Manitoba, I met with steelworkers who told me that they are always worried about the next layoff announcements, never sure what's coming up next. In Windsor, auto workers told me about living with constant economic uncertainty and the fear of losing their homes, their savings, and their stability. In Sault Ste. Marie, steel producers explained that the existing tariffs are already doing damage, putting thousands of good union jobs on the line and threatening the local economy. There is so much at risk. Canada must act with strength and with purpose, and we have to respond with unity and urgency. Urgency is key. We need bold, targeted action to defend workers and to protect our economic sovereignty, starting with emergency reforms to employment insurance so that when workers are laid off, they are not wondering whether or not they can support their families. We need an immediate expansion of Section 53 measures so that the federal government can quickly act to stabilize critical sectors like steel, aluminum, and auto. We need a firm commitment to use Canadian-made steel in all public infrastructure and make that a requirement under the One Canadian Economy legislation. We need targeted wage subsidies to help keep workers connected to the jobs and to the businesses and to keep those businesses afloat during this time. We need Made in Canada tax credits to incentivize Canadian sourcing for private contractors. And finally, we need Buy Clean policies that prioritize low-emission, Canadian-made steel and support good union jobs while fighting climate change at the same time. These proposed solutions are about protecting our long-term economic resilience. They're about making sure that working families do not get left behind in the face of this economic instability. The damage is real, and without coordinated action, it will get worse. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. We need to defend our jobs, we need to invest in our industries, and we need to protect our communities that built this country. Labor, business, municipalities, and government, we each have an important role to play. The fact that there are three of us standing here today tells you what is possible when we focus on what matters to Canadians: protecting workers, defending jobs, supporting communities, and building a stronger economy. Because at the end of the day, it isn't just about tariffs. It's about Canada's economic sovereignty. It's about the kind of Canada that we want to build, a country where workers who power local economies and communities can thrive. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Carol.
Thank you very much, Bea. Hello, everybody. We're here today as members of Team Canada, united, focused, and resolved in our opposition to these unjust tariffs. These aren't abstract policies, they're decisions with real consequences. They are driving up costs, disrupting industries, and threatening jobs and economic growth in communities right across this country. I'm here on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, representing 2,100 municipalities and their local leaders, working every day to build strong, resilient, and future-ready communities from coast to coast to coast. When it comes to Canada-US trade, we need to center the local perspective because that's where the impacts are felt first and felt most. That's where Canadians place their trust to get things done, and that's where we can lead with action. Municipalities are core to the Canada-US relationship. We're border towns, trade corridors, and major ports. We're the local engine that keeps this integrated economy running. And we're also where its disruptions hit the hardest. That's why Canadian mayors have been clear from the very beginning. We stand with our federal government, we stand with our provinces and territories, we stand with our workers and with industry partners. These tariffs are wrong. They hurt communities on both sides of the border. They need to go. We've already seen what's possible when we speak with one voice. Since the beginning of this dispute, through FCM, Canadian mayors have been meeting directly with their US counterparts. Mayor to mayor, we've headed to Washington and other American cities, building ties through the US Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, and the National Association of Counties. Last week, as part of FCM's annual conference, we welcomed a bipartisan delegation, Republican and Democrat mayors and county leaders who stood with us in calling for an end to these harmful measures. And later this month, we're sending a delegation of Canadian mayors to the U.S. Conference of Mayors Conference to keep that conversation going. Because when American mayors hear directly from Canadian mayors, it matters. That's the power of local diplomacy, and it works. So yes, we stand with the federal government in opposing these tariffs. We back a Team Canada approach, and we're proud to bring the strength of local government to that national effort. But we're also focused on what comes next. As the Prime Minister has rightly said, we need to build a Canada that ensures we are in charge of our own destiny. That means building communities that are strong, safe, and economically competitive. Communities that attract investment, support productivity, and deliver for Canadians. And that will take more than just federal resolve. It will take a pragmatic, modern model of partnership, one that breaks down traditional silos and matches ambition with resourcing local delivery capacity. And that means working across all orders of government and across sectors. It means aligning federal, provincial, and territorial resources with the local capacity to deliver outcomes. And it means empowering the governments closest to the ground, the ones already delivering results for Canadians every day. Because this isn't just about confronting unjust tariffs, it's about building a country that can weather disruptions, protect jobs, and deliver progress in an increasingly uncertain world. Today, together with labor and with business, we stand together to send a clear message. We stand united for fair trade. We stand up for the people and communities our collective members serve, and we stand ready to build together. Merci. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Candice.
Hello, everyone. We are standing here united today on behalf of businesses, municipalities, workers, with great concern for all of the communities that are so brutally impacted, especially with this escalation in tariffs. Just a reminder, there's no CUSMA exemption with these tariffs, which are Section 232. And our remarkable steel and aluminum companies have already been shouldering other tariffs at a lower level for months. But today is, in fact, a game changer. According to the Canadian Steel Producers Association, tariffs at this level, 50%, effectively close the U.S. market for half of its production, and this is indeed catastrophic. And there is a massive ripple effect throughout businesses across the economy. We've said many times just the threat and uncertainty that tariffs bring does in fact affect all businesses. But now with this level of tariffs in our communities, we have to think of the horrible ripple effects. When one industry might go down, how many other businesses in those communities rely on that business? And how many jobs and people and families rely on those businesses that rely on business? So we look at this escalation as reckless, and one that doesn't make any sense and is in fact strategically short-sighted. Because in addition to the impacts that our communities are facing, tariffs at this level don't just harm the Canadian industry and our Canadian communities. They strain the very supply chains that in fact keep both economies running in Canada and the United States. Costs are climbing, and in fact there could be a pathway here where self-harm runs its course. The U.S. decision to double tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum is both deeply troubling and strategically counterproductive. And it undermines current efforts to redefine our economic and security relationship with one another. This is not the first time we have seen steel and aluminum tariffs. 2018, we faced this, and we have the facts and the data that prove it was a failed policy. One could say it created some jobs, but we must finish that sentence. While it created 1,000 steel jobs in the United States, in fact, 75,000 jobs across steel-related industries were lost. So when we look at what is, in fact, the rationale, I do struggle with that, as many of us do. Why is this happening? It doesn't, in fact, make a lot of sense. I can understand, however, the aim to protect an important industry. But in fact, then, it's illogical to penalize a close defense ally in the name of national security who might share some of those aims and objectives of protecting an industry. And in fact, if you just take a step back and look at an attempt to transform an economy, you would think you would involve the economy that you are most highly integrated with. I do believe and have hope that Canada and US have shared interests, but today we are all frustrated because it's obvious we don't have a shared language. And there is the heart of the matter with steel and aluminum. They are in fact more to Canada and more to the US than just an economic asset. Our domestic steel production provides us with jobs and an important role in our economy, but it also provides us with strategic insulation. It allows Canada to act with greater autonomy on matters of defense and economic resilience. So how do we protect our industry? Whether we do that together, ideally, looking at North America, continental economic and national security, or we're doing it as Canada in the domestic front. So we've heard some things about what is urgently needed. And I will be the first to talk about, let's use Canadian steel and aluminum for our nation-building projects. There is the aspect of time. And that aim, which I promote, our communities won't be able to wait for, even though it is a great aim and an important one. Our Canadian steel and aluminum industry and the communities impacted need our support. And this includes federal governments, all levels of government, working together decisively and urgently. For businesses in the US importing Canada's steel and aluminum, those costs are already high. But we do have some US steel coming into Canada now tariff-free. So we can look at the use of targeted counter-tariffs, but be careful to maximize impact on the US while minimizing impact on the home front. And at the same time, Canada can address the challenge of unfairly traded steel in our domestic market. This moment, as upsetting as it is, calls for calm, coordinated leadership, and we urge our governments to bring every diplomatic and legal tool to bear to protect workers and to protect our communities and to protect this industry. We must ensure that our domestic steel and aluminum industry remains resilient because their health is a matter of national interest. Thank you.
We will now open it up for questions. If I can get your name and your outlet, that'd be appreciated. And we'll start with questions in the room and then head off to Zoom. On va débuter la période de questions. S'il vous plaît, donnez votre nom et votre média. Et puis, on va commencer avec les questions de la salle pour ensuite y aller vers le Zoom.
Alex Bennett, Ultron. Sorry, I don't want to jump in. Question for everybody, I guess, but I think I got a sense of it, Candace, from what you were just saying. Retaliatory tariffs matching these 50% tariffs. It sounds like you guys want them to proceed with caution, maybe increase and have some sort of retaliation, but can you specify exactly what you'd like to see the government do in terms of retaliation, tariff retaliation?
Yes. In this moment, it is absolutely understandable. We would want to show fight. And I think we had that sense from Canadians with the onset of tariffs, especially the border and fentanyl tariffs. We need to also show strength and show smarts in this moment. And so that's just taking that step back and being thoughtful in our response and ensuring, as I said, that in planning any type of response, that it is taking into account maybe unintended consequences or impacts that we just need to take that check on, so we're not harming other businesses in Canada by applying retaliatory tariffs.
What kind of impact would it have if there were retaliatory tariffs that you're concerned about?
Right, so if you have other businesses in Canada relying on those imports, do we have a plan in place? Are they able to adjust? Or, just by collecting that information and consulting a bit before dealing with those impacts after the fact.
Today, Mickey with Politico, today Premier Doug Ford called on the Prime Minister to double the tariffs on steel and aluminum. He said he relayed this message to the Prime Minister. Do you agree that we should be doubling it to 50% to match the US?
As I said, I am trying to even discipline myself because this is frustrating. This is emotional. This is real impacts to people we know in communities across the country. So it's understandable, to want to show fight. But as I said, we have to also be thoughtful as we contemplate our response. And I am not privy to the discussions that are, in fact, live negotiations in our relationship, starting with what does that look like from an economic security and national security perspective between our countries. And so I imagine that has to be factored in as well, potential impacts there to our response.
You mentioned showing strength, and Ford accused today the Prime Minister of being steamrolled by Donald Trump. Do you agree with this sentiment?
I will say this. In this moment, the unity in Canada, the Team Canada, one team approach, as we are demonstrating and modeling here today, is really critical. And if we lose sight of that in this moment, I think that potentially leaves us in a less strong position than we could be. And in any other related discussion around this, I will take the opportunity to build on your question and just say that it's really, really critical and important that we don't lose touch with or forget the what's at stake here for Canada. We are in a crisis. We need to step back and regroup and redefine and transform our own economy. And so I would say that one Team Canada approach is just so important to maintain at this moment.
Kyle Duggan from the Canadian Press. Donald Trump's actions this week demonstrate that he clearly hasn't gotten the message yet, that this will hurt the U.S. economy. Is there a way that you can actually send that message to him at this point, given what he's just done? Like, is there something that Canada can do to actually convince him that this is shooting himself in the foot?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I think what this shows is two things. One, that it is a very unpredictable and volatile situation and remains so. And so the importance of, while the Prime Minister and our government are in these conversations about tariffs, not losing focus on building the resilience of our own economy so that we can weather whatever the next manufactured crisis might be is critical. And so those are conversations that we are hoping are going to continue at pace around how to make ourselves stronger and get our own own house in order as we go forward. And obviously that includes building strong and resilient communities at a baseline level. The other thing I can say is we certainly are of the opinion that, what's going to convince Americans is hearing from one another, is a pressure that Americans are going to feel. And this is certainly something that Americans are feeling in their communities day in and day out. I've just met with mayors, again, from both sides of the political spectrum who were here talking to our mayors and standing shoulder to shoulder to them, putting their necks out on the line a little bit to say, this is not okay. Our communities are suffering. And we're going to continue those kinds of diplomatic efforts, I think, as part of the One Team Canada approach. I know Candice has been part of delegations, Bea has been part of delegations to the United States. We're sending FCM members to the United States consistently, even as close as 2 weeks from now, to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, to keep these channels open. The more we can have reach across and strengthen the relationships that exist at a ground level, that exist through industry, that exist through local government, through workers, the stronger a hand we give our federal government in mounting pressure on the federal government. The reality is those closest to the ground, and certainly local leaders in the United States, and what we are hearing from them, again, regardless of if they are Republican or Democrat, are saying this is hurting our communities. It needs to stop.
How long can Canadian industry sustain 50% tariffs before we start seeing massive layoffs? Like, how fast does the response need to come to bail out industry or workers?
Yeah, well, I'll let my colleagues speak to industry and workers. I'll just say at a community level, it can't come fast enough. As Candice said, rightfully so, even just the uncertainty is creating disruption. We're seeing projects stall. We're seeing folks lose their jobs. We're seeing real concern at a community level, and mayors are voicing that at every opportunity possible. I'll let maybe you jump in on the...
Listen, the reality is we've already seen job losses in the steel and aluminum industry because the uncertainty is just as bad as the reality of it. And we know within the next couple of days and weeks, job losses will start to accumulate. So time is absolutely critically important. We have 23,000 steel jobs in this country that will be impacted within the next couple of days. We have another 9,500 aluminum jobs that are impacted in this country. Integrating all of the spin-off jobs in those communities, that's 160,000 jobs across Canada that are impacted now. And so as employers are working off the orders that they're working on and making decisions, that is going to have dire consequences for those workers. Those workers need to know that they can make their financial commitments. They need to know that government has their back, and they need to know that we have a plan to be able to fight back.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. So if time is critical, what do you want to see the government do right away? And then what is your position on counter-tariffs matching?
So from the labor perspective, we need to use every tool in our toolbox. So surtaxes has to be one item. Ensuring that no American steel or aluminum is used in Canadian production is another item. No integration of their materials if they are not open to having our materials. Counter-tariffs has to be on the table. We have to be meeting force with force. We cannot back away from this. This is a person who's is not rational in terms of thinking about, what the implications are. When we look at the various different sectors that workers work in, all kinds of types of manufacturing, those items go back and forth across the border multiple times. The cost of these items are borne not just by the workers within that industry, but by workers in those communities. And that will start having an impact on American workers as well. And that hopefully will also start putting some political pressure on, the administration to make different choices. So now and strong response is what's needed.
So you want to see the matching tariffs on aluminum
Yes,
steel?
I do.
Another 25%. So
Absolutely.
and once more, for you, why is that necessary to happen right away?
It's critical because workers are facing job losses now. Workers are wanting to know what our government is prepared to do. We just came through a federal election. We just had parties identifying that they are going to be in workers' corners to make sure that those jobs are going to be continuing to be viable. So now we need to actually see proof in the pudding to actually see that this is happening and that government has a response. We talked about making sure that employment insurance is tightened up so that people can actually qualify. We talked about making sure that there's furlough programs that keep workers connected to their workplaces. All of those things need to be in place ASAP, and we need to hear those decisions being made this week.
Natasha Bolowski, Canada's National Observer. What is the impact of these tariffs going to be on, some of the progress that's been made to green steel production, for example?
Well, listen, we want to make sure that we utilize green steel, right, and green manufacturing whenever possible. We know in Canada we have a much more clean process for these kinds of things, and so we should be utilizing our own made in Canada product whenever possible because we know it's cleaner for the environment. We have a crisis happening in Canada right now. The prairies are on fire, literally, reminding us that climate change is a very real impact. And so whenever possible, we need to be mindful of those things as well. But right now, it's also save jobs. We're like, literally, the furniture is burning. We got to save it.
Do you have any indication of how close we are to having a deal with the U.S.? The PM seemed to cite that as one of the reasons for not doing.
If you can speak to that.
I would say I don't think any of us can speak to that. Our chief negotiator is the one who that question should be directed to. And I think what we have heard is that those negotiations are live and more private in nature than perhaps is comfortable, but perhaps we need to be patient and see that through. So, thank you.
Oh, sorry. The Prime Minister campaigned on a promise to stand up to Donald Trump. How would you rate how he's doing so far?
It'll depend on what we hear this week.
What do you mean? What do you need to hear to?
I want to see how we are going to support the people that keep our economy running. How are we supporting workers? How are we keeping them tied to their communities? And how do we do that by also making sure that we are not backing away from a challenge? You know, when you are at a bargaining table, you need to meet force with force. Sorry, my friends on the stage here. But the reality is, you know, it's a negotiation, right? And you can't have a negotiation when you step away without also bringing something to the table. So we're looking to see what that something is that our Prime Minister is going to be taking to that table.
Ford also said he's considering, because we don't have to just do countermeasures, there's other things that provinces can do to retaliate. Would you like to see provinces step up and maybe retaliate in their own way? Ford said he's leaving on the table, possibly putting the electricity tax back on the Americans. Is that a measure that you would like to see?
This is an all-hands-on-deck moment. Premiers, I think, are just as keenly focused and have a vested interest in finding solutions. So we, of course, welcome anything that's going to keep jobs in communities and keep workers at work. So whether that's provinces acting separately, whether that's provinces making a decision for their export products or their import products, 100% we want to see that.
And then in the Prime Minister's statement today, he said, you know, this will hurt American industries, American workers, Canadian industry, but didn't say Canadian workers. Do you have a comment on that?
Of course, we know that, you know, when we initially heard about the tariff threats back in November and we started looking at the impact of wide-ranging tariffs, that's 2.4 million jobs in Canada that would be impacted by the initial wide-ranging tariffs that Trump had talked about at that time. We are now at 160 with steel and aluminum alone. And every single day, it's a new tweet, it's a new, you know, comment from the Rose Garden or what have you, and workers are worried. And so even though there may not have been additional announcements on tariffs for other industries, the fact of the uncertainty of it is causing a tremendous amount of stress and frustration for workers, right? They're trying to decide, can I afford to put my kid in summer camp this year? You know, can I afford to make sure that I renegotiate my mortgage, or what am I gonna have to do? Back in February, workers were telling me they were thinking about selling their house at that time because of the uncertainty, never mind because of the reality. We're now at the reality stage for steel and aluminum workers.
We can take now a question on Zoom. Palak M, Parliament Today. You go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. For Ms. Bruske, you mentioned that the One Canadian Economy legislation wanting an amendment that requires the use of Canadian products. What conversations have you had with the government here, and are they receptive toward that request? And are there any other tweaks you want to see?
So various different unions as well as the CLC have been speaking out on this, and we are demanding that that's part of the solution, is that we are utilizing Canadian-made steel and aluminum, and so we're going to continue pushing that. We haven't, outside of the minister making a comment, I think on Sunday, to indicate that that would be a priority. We haven't seen that confirmed yet in terms of any kind of pending legislation, so we want to see that. And then, of course, all tools in the toolbox need to be looked at.
And for Ms. Saab, around your the FCM's annual conference last week, the Prime Minister told your president that when it comes to funding these large projects, talks will take place first and foremost between Ottawa and the provinces. Are you disappointed to hear this? And are you also disappointed to not have representation at last week's talks?
Yeah, I think if anything, what's happened as a result of the moment in time, and it happens, we've seen it in the COVID pandemic too at moments of crisis, is that governments increasingly figure out that we need to work together across all orders of government and across industries. I'll tell you, I was actually quite encouraged by the Prime Minister's conversations with us, both off the stage but also privately. I can say quite sincerely, we authentically had a conversation that was focused, that was pragmatic. It was a conversation about what's working and what isn't. And quite clearly, when things work, when programs work, when they deliver for Canadians at the pace they need to, it's because governments have done what what Canadians expect us to do, which is get around a table and work with one another. I can also tell you that this crisis in the context of our relationship with the United States has also given us an opportunity to work hand in glove with the Council of the Federation, with the federal government. We've been working through our embassy and with them as well in the missions that we've been sending forward into the United States to really come at this in a One Team Canada approach. I think what I heard from the Prime Minister, which he said publicly on our stage, is that certainly there is a conversation, a longer term conversation that could, and we would argue definitely needs to happen. And in the meantime, we need to be focused on how we deliver for Canadians across a spectrum of intersected crises that we're facing on. From a local government perspective, I mean, we're pragmatists by necessity, and that sounds good to us. We want to make sure that we are focused on how we build homes, how we build the kind of resilient infrastructure the country needs, how we're adapting to climate. As Bea said, the wildfires are a very timely reminder, an unfortunate reminder of the necessity of moving with pace on that. Certainly, it's my perspective that the Prime Minister understood the urgency on all of that and understood that working with local government is synonymous with delivery. And so I think it was an open conversation. There's a lot to build on from there, and I think I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing from the First Minister's meeting. The conversation around unity, the work to make one Canadian economy, I think is important, and hopefully that translates broader than that across the full spectrum of orders of government and across industry partners, because it's important. And I think at the end of the day, Canadians aren't looking for us to sit back and fall within traditional silos. They're saying, let's get it done, get around a table, sort it out, and we're certainly open and willing and look forward to continuing the conversation with the Prime Minister, with his team, and with our provincial and territorial counterparts.
Can I just ask the Chamber, could you explain what do you think the current impact of the current retaliatory tariffs that are in place is on Canadian businesses and on the U.S.?
Well, there's been quite an extensive process to go through and deal and work through like the remission process and all of that. So I actually don't have for you today like a comparison of, at the start of the tariffs and now what that is looking like. But I'll leave it there for today, but thank you for the question.
This concludes the press conference. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse. Merci.